All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. For the interest of time, we will get started with this morning's webinar. Like I said before, we are today celebrating Pan-African Women's Day. So we're really excited to have women-owned businesses from all over the continent. I can see that the chat has already started telling us where you're from, what it is that you do. I hope that we can keep this momentum going on throughout the session so that we know that we're connecting with women-owned businesses from all around the continent. So as I said, that this is a joint initiative from both African Women in Technology and also We Connect International together with our special guest speaker, Anele. So please, just a little bit of housekeeping. We all are quite familiar with how Zoom works. So please just make sure that if you don't need to have your camera on, you can have it off, just to save some bandwidth for those of you who are joining online. And of course, please make sure that you are muted. Any questions during the session, please just put it in the chat and we'll be more than happy to direct it to the speaker at the end of the session. So with that said, I will hand over to our regional director, Margaret Mutheo, to do a brief introduction to We Connect International. Over to you, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and what an amazing day when we get to celebrate the great work that women-owned businesses do across the continents, and on Pan-African Women's Day, which is actually supposed to be on the 31st. But yeah, we celebrate women every other day. Yeah, so just to give a little bit background about Pan-African Women's Day, because some of you could be wondering, maybe you've never heard of it before. It originated from the struggles and aspirations for women in Africa for liberation, social justice, and equality. It was established officially on the 31st of July, 1962 in Dar es Salaam. Yeah, so today we are really excited because this day not only honors the remarkable achievements of women in Africa, but even the great work that you're doing as entrepreneurs and contributing greatly to our economies. And just to give a bit of information about We Connect International, we are a member-led organization that is global, a B2B platform that is just for you. And our key mission is to ensure that you, as a woman-owned business from across Africa and every other region where we are in, that you participate in global supply chains. We do have our member buyers currently at 187 of them who are global corporations that are eager to do business with you. Yeah, so we identify, train, and certify women-owned businesses. So if you're not yet a member of We Connect International, you do have an opportunity to do so. Registration is absolutely free. And then our key markets are Kenya, which is our most recent market, South Africa, where some of you are joining from, and Nigeria. And I would like to invite Vanessa again to introduce herself and hand it over to Yeshua so that we get to know about We Connect International and the work that you do, especially in those markets. Over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you so much. So Margaret really did summarize what it is that we do as an organization. We're all about giving women-owned businesses market access to some of the largest buyers in the world. We have over 180 corporate members that we work with, but we've also been partnered with a number of organizations who are not only looking to connect with women, but also to educate them. So as entrepreneurs, learning is a constant. It's something that you always have to be aware of. So we want to make sure that we are on the same journey with you to successful and sustainable entrepreneurship. If you want to know a little bit more about what's happening in the South African market, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I will put my email in the chat. And of course, I'm hoping that you will have a good Pan-African Women's Day. Over to you, Yeshua.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Can you hear me good?
Yes, we can.
Am I audible? Okay, thank you. I had to jump on my device. My laptop is acting funny. Thanks, Vanessa, and thank you to Margaret, also our amazing regional director, Vanessa, our fantastic market lead in South Africa. My name is Yeshua Russell. I'm the country director in Nigeria for We Connect International. I'm based in Abuja. We have lots of activities, just as Margaret and Vanessa have said. We have lots of activities planned. We are currently working on some joint meet the member events where our certified women can meet with about a large number of corporates. We have lots of trainings, engagements, and opportunities being shared right now. If you'd like to have more information about what we're doing in Nigeria at this point in time, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address will be dropped in, also will be dropped in the chat box very shortly. And if you'd also like to maybe engage with women-owned businesses in Nigeria or in the West African region, please feel free to reach out to me. Once again, have a fantastic day today with great learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Yeshua. So I will hand it over to Ruth, who will do a brief introduction to African women in technology. Ruth, over to you.
Hello, guys. Rovinia. Sorry, go ahead.
Go on, Robin.
Okay, thank you so much for joining today's webinar. The webinar, we've already been told by one of us, the brief discussion about Pan-Africa Women's Day. At least we have an idea about it. So I represent Africa Women in Technology. I am the operations admin. And something about Africa Women in Technology, our community represents the resilience, brilliance, and limitless potential of Africa women in technology. We believe that technology holds the key to unlock a sustainable and inclusive future, and we are committed to leveraging its power to make a positive impact across African continent. Like right now, we are connected through technology. I mean, someone from South Africa, I'm based in Kenya, someone from Nigeria, we connect through this webinar. So Africa Women in Technology, AWIT that is not just a platform for an individual success. It is a tight-knit community that thrives on collaboration, support, and empowerment. We understand the importance of creating space where ideas can flourish, where experience are shared, and where innovations is nurtured. So our mission is clear: to empower and celebrate women-owned businesses in Africa. We believe that diversity is the foundation of progress, and that women's representation in technology is not just an inspiration, but it is a necessity. Right now, we have to indulge ourselves into technology. You know, for our businesses to thrive, we have to get into technology. So together we are architects of change, building a future where women in tech lead, shape, and drive sustainable initiatives that impact lives and community. So let us come together as one digital family. Right now, I can call you a digital family because we are joined together with the digital, united in one commitment to harness the power of technology for positive change. Thank you for joining us. And make sure you check us out, Africa Women in Technology. I will also share my email. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us. You can check our social media platforms as well. Also, another thing about us, we have a website where we opt to feature women in technology, not only in technology, but women in general, women in business. We encourage them to share their ideas, their journey, and also to mentor others. So if you have anything that you would like to share also, reach out to my email. I will pin my email below. So I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker of today. Our speaker is Anele. So a little bit of Anele. Anele is the founder and CEO of Igugu Global, Africa's green and sustainable finance deal room. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Igugu. Igugu provides green mapping, tagging, and carbon diligent solution for corporate, bank, and investors. A financial market specialist, Anele has experience in South Africa, Tanzania, Ghana, Seychelles, name it all, as well as Nigeria. In this market, Anele worked at both the private and public sector level to maximize sustainable economic value. So Anele studied in Hong Kong and New York, holding masters in global finance from New York. So I'll give her the platform. Anele, are you around? Feel free also. I'm going to mute on my end so that you can carry ahead.
Hi, Ravine. Thank you very much for that generous introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you all this morning. I'm dialing in from Miami, where we're currently doing a project on mangroves, connecting the mangroves and the work around coastal resilience here in Miami to the work on mangroves and coastal resilience that we do in Ghana and Nigeria. It's 3 a.m., sorry, it's just gone 4 a.m., but I absolutely could not have missed the opportunity to spend this time with you all and celebrate Pan-African Women's Day. With We Connect, this is our first engagement, but we do have a long ongoing relationship with African Women in Technology as a female-led technology company to stay engaged in this network and to work with other female leaders. Leveraging technology to drive change is something that's of strategic importance to us. And we've been proud members of the African Women in Technology community in Lagos, where our company was founded. And we continue to carry that work and that spirit with us wherever we go. So it's a real delight to be able to spend this time, share thoughts of what that journey has been like for us over the last 5 years with African Women in Technology, and then broader reflections around the topic that brings us together today. I hope this will be an interactive session. I don't have a lot to share with you. My presentation, I thought we'd cover it in sort of three areas. I have a few slides, but they're simply for you to have something to reflect on, so that you don't grow too tired of my voice, or have something to guide you as I speak to some of the matters. And that's simply, firstly, reflections on Pan-African Women's Day, women, our role in sustainability and the climate transition right now. This moment from a technology perspective was the second point I wanted to touch on, and what it means for businesses, and more specifically, female leadership, as we think about envisioning a sustainable transition, sustainable and resilient communities in 2030, 2050, where there's net zero targets and beyond. And then finally, as we think about what those resilient communities look like, as we begin to give them texture, my final role, I think something that I can share with you, is how we all as entrepreneurs and businesses begin to then use some of the big picture drivers of change to get on the wagon and really build momentum within our own businesses, within our own communities, and the change that we're making where we are. So with that, Ravine has already given me my introduction. My name is Anele Makwaza. I'm the founder of a business called Igugu Global. Igugu is an isiZulu word that means treasure. And we're a green finance deal room. We're a technology platform that makes it incredibly easy to search, structure, and finance sustainable assets. Working directly in climate, working directly in sustainability, my first reflection today on this occasion is on us as women and the role of women in the climate transition, which is something that we see every day, particularly from an African perspective. You know, now more than ever, now as technology races to the fore, in terms of solutioning or mapping the path forward, be it in instruments, financial instruments in our area, green bonds, carbon credits, or any of the technologies that we hear around how we build a more robust, more sustainable, and more inclusive society. We tend to hear technology and innovation, lots of talk about technology and innovation and excitement, and the opportunity around leveraging technology, but we don't dwell as much on women, the role that, or not just women, but people, and the role that people have to play in that transition moment and what it means for communities on the ground. In our context in Africa, women have, for the greatest time, being custodians of nature and communities. And I thought that we're better to open up this presentation and open up our time together than just a reflection on just simply that, women, climate, and the role that the world finds itself today. I always lean on the work of previous teachers and couldn't think of anyone more apt, any words more apt to bring when I think of the current state of the world to you today than the words of Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who's the writer of Women on the Wolves. And I thought, if I may, I'd just open up with the first, her very first opening words in the introduction and how they call on us, where she reflects on wildlife, wild women, and both of them being endangered species. So as I open up on that reflection on Women's Day and the state of the world today, please allow me to share her words with you, where she opens in the very introduction of Women with the Wolves, singing over the bones. And she says, over time, we have seen the feminine instinctive nature looted, driven back, and overbuilt. For long periods, it has been mismanaged like the wildlife and the wildlands. For several thousand years, as soon and as often as we turn our backs, it is relegated to the poorest lost land in the psyche. The spiritual lands of wild women have throughout history been plundered or burned, bulldozed, and natural cycles forced into unnatural rhythms to please others. It's not by accident that the pristine wilderness of the planet disappears as the understanding of our own inner natures fades. It is also not so difficult to see why old forests and old women are viewed as not very important resources. It's not such a mystery. It's not coincidental that wolves and coyotes and bears and wildish women have similar reputations. They all share a related instinctual archetype, and as such, both are erroneously reputed to be ingracious, holy and innately dangerous, and even ravenous. There's so many parallels in what she describes as the intuition of women that has been curtailed and reined back, and the fragility that we see in the world today, the disconnection that we see in people's ability to connect, the disconnection that we see even in financial systems when we continuously speak of technology, leveraging technology to drive access, but we never really see those technologies land where they're most needed, particularly where we hope they'd leverage the greatest amount of change in topics such as carbon and sustainability. Reflecting on that is a direct call to me as a female leader to every single day show up with that mindedness of what is the feminine intuition, what is the stewardship and leadership that we as women have an inject into the businesses that we lead, and what is it that we have an opportunity to inject in this moment of exceptional fragility, where we see great divides, where on the one hand you have an unlimited amount of capital. We speak now of $40 trillion in sustainability tagged or ring-fenced capital, seeking an opportunity to make a difference directly in communities, directly in community-led businesses that are making an impact and sustaining and building more resilient communities. But at the same time, we don't seem to have the tools for that capital to find those businesses. So the state of fragility is not by accident. We deeply in our work believe that the more we leverage women, the more we bring women to the center, the more voices and we bring, and the more cohesive the solutions that we're able to map and the tools that we build are able to be in terms of ultimately reaching the final recipient, the final beneficiary, the community that really needs access to water, so that the little girl, the African little girl who spends 6 hours a day looking for water is able to get back to where she needs to be, and that is in the classroom. So not only is the separation and this almost curtailing of female leadership something that's been pervasive in the mainstream, at the same time, feminine leadership archetypes and women really caring and nurturing communities. As African women, we know that this has been part of, this is part of our legacy. This is part of something that we're all raised with from a very early age. And that we form an unbroken chain to some extent of women who have cared not only for their families, but for their communities, and have built and woven businesses around that for many generations. In Kenya, speaking directly to community and climate and women, and this unbroken chain, we have the very robust model and leader and teacher in Wangari Maathai. But we find so often that this leadership is spoken of episodically. It's spoken of as if there's a dearth of women ready to rise to this call. And part of what we're here to do, and part of my message today, is that it did not, is simply to remind us all that it did not start with Madame Wangari Maathai, although we stand on the shoulders of a giant with her. It is really an ancient chain of female leadership, and a chain that binds us all and calls us all today to take our roles as leaders, if not directly in the climate struggle, in the land, working the land, as Madame Maathai did, then in the sectors and with the tools and with the swords that we do indeed have. And this unbroken chain of leadership, like starting in Kenya and East Africa, is unbroken. It's unbroken up until today. And as evidence of that, we have initiatives such as the Kigali Communique. So for those who are unaware, the Kigali Communique was drafted and finalized at the start of 2022. And it's a communique that was drafted in Rwanda, where female leaders, female entrepreneurs came together again to say, what do African women need in this moment in order to steer in order for us collectively to steer and drive a just transition for the continent. And it was really around the energy transition. And the declaration was made at the SE for All Forum in Kigali during May, where the ministers and high-level representatives of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ghana, Kenya, Malawi, Morocco, Nigeria, Rwanda, and others met to discuss beyond a policy level, but right down at a community level, led by women, what is it that we hope for, and what does a transition look like for Africa, the women of Africa, and as a consequence of that, the communities which we live in and bolster. So the outcome of that was seven directives, and I'd like to share those with you so that you too, going forward, will be part of the Kigali Communique. Those of you who lead businesses that have a direct opportunity to participate in the initiatives and this group of women that has gone on to lead this work, I invite you as well to connect with me. Let us bring you in. There are so many voices and so many businesses that are needed in order to make this reality and or make this vision a reality for us where we live everywhere. So to address the development gaps and to put Africa on a pathway to economic prosperity and net zero, that is well within our destiny, there were 7 transformative actions that were outlined towards achieving a sustainable and just transition in Africa. The first of these was making sustainable energy available to the entire continent, supporting Africa in the deployment of gas as a transition fuel and the long-term displacement of gas, displacement of gas by renewable energy and green hydrogen for industrial development. So that's another position in terms of how we transition out from the current coal context and Africa's position in that. The third was to pursue a modern energy minimum of 1,000 kilowatts per capita consumption. Middle income countries currently consume about 2,500 kilowatts per capita, and high income economies consume 6,000 kilowatts per capita. In Africa, for us, in order to get there, we're also prioritizing a revolution in clean cooking, something that directly touches on the lives of women. The Kigali Communique is really about scaling up, on the 4th point, scaling up public and private sector investment to well over $2 trillion in new generation, transmission and distribution infrastructure and new energy technologies and delivery system.
Hi, Anene. Hi, Anene.
Hello?
Sorry to interrupt you. We cannot see your screen. Do you mind just sharing your presentation with us?
Absolutely. I thought I was already on screen share. If that is of value to you, 1 minute.
Thank you.
I can do that now. Thank you. You can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I think I'll just go into presentation mode with that. Thank you. So we will to the scaling up private and public sector investment to well over $2 trillion in new generation and transmission infrastructure, and new energy technology, prioritizing the creation of millions of jobs in new sustainable energy sector to benefit local economies, including through the creation of local supply chains and climate-aligned national energy transition plans, lifting the development finance restrictions that currently limit projects in Africa, and that can mean local development needs, and ramp up domestic resource mobilization, together with catalyzing, finally, number 7, a step change in technology transfer mechanisms to ensure that the entire continent has access to the latest energy innovations on fair terms. So, as I was sharing with you, the Kigali Communique is a very short one-pager, but it is the manifestation of continuous efforts in public sector and private sector, but uniquely in the efforts of female leaders to craft a more cohesive vision for how our communities today transition to a more robust, sustainable future. And so the Kigali communication is a litmus test of where we are now, what the invitation is today, but it builds on so many pieces of legislation, on efforts of businesses, and dynamic change that we're seeing across sectors that we're invited to tap into, leverage, and really accelerate the transition into a sustainable future. For ourselves and our role in that, how Igugu came to be involved, or where we position the Kigali Communique rather than how we came to be involved. Where we position the Kigali Communique is as a strong roadmap, specifically zeroed in on the Sustainable Development Goal of a renewable SDG 7 and our renewable energy aspirations as a continent. It's not by accident that this is the one that galvanizes us the most, given that by and large, as the third point makes, our per capita energy consumption and really communities, families, businesses all across the continent remain by and large in the dark. Where do we position the Kigali Communique? What does it mean for us now that we have this roadmap? Or what else, what other tools do we have that we use to work with businesses as they transition and really start to think about the state of the world right now, the fragility we see in the world right now, and how we move towards weaving a more sustainable society. I suppose this is a good point to pause and share a bit of our background or my background. My background is in finance. Prior to starting Igugu Global, I had worked in banking. That's how I initially left South Africa. At the start of the last financial crisis, there was a day during the crisis where a South African bank was valued, had a higher market capitalization than a British bank that had an 8% stake in it. And coming out of that moment, Barclays desired a greater share of Absa, and in taking a greater investment stake in that business, Barclays Africa was formed. And that was what gave me the opportunity to initially leave South Africa and then move to Tanzania, to Ghana, the Seychelles, and beyond. But really what I was doing in each of those missions was moving to a new country, a new community, tasked with, in this bank, in this country, in this banking ecosystem, how do we maximize sustainable shareholder value? How do we build, what are the right teams? What are the funding and liquidity? What is the funding and liquidity environment of the country? And how do we build a balance sheet that allows us to offer more to customers while protecting the bank? This is how I came to be in the Seychelles, and really in part of what would become the world's first blue bond, or the world's first debt for nature swap and climate transaction. In that moment of the Nature Conservancy and Leonardo DiCaprio, who were representing Leonardo DiCaprio and a group of private investors, the transaction was fairly simple. A group of private investors desired to refinance the government of the Seychelles. The differential between the government's financing rate from the World Bank and others would be, the new financing rates would be lower than the initial financing rate the government had been offered. And the opportunity was to take the differential in that financing and ring pool that funding in order to direct it to businesses that were working on initiatives that either built coastal resilience or directly protected the ocean. Right there in that moment, as we were working through the transaction, there was the recognition that there was something, we were at a very unique moment in finance, and that something that had never been asked of before was now being asked of us, right? Finance is ones and zeros. Is the deal bankable? Is the credit good? Does the market and the appetite allow us to move with this transaction? But for the very first time, we were now being asked, will this deal be sustainable? And sitting at as the treasurer or the head of markets for that bank, I instantly knew, I can tell you the dollar value of my balance sheet. I can tell you the credit profile of the companies and individuals that make up our balance sheet. But there wasn't a single graph or reference point within the bank that could give us an indication for what sectors are these businesses in. On a quick pull-up, what do they actually do? Are they in climate vulnerable neighborhoods, or are they in resilient locations? How much of our balance sheet was in coastal real estate versus how much of our balance sheet was in businesses that work directly with women or in education? These were all questions that were that we had no answer to, but at the same time, the reflection was that it's just our bank that has no answers to these questions. It's really the whole gamut of finance, balance sheets as a whole. We're not used to thinking of, yes, we can finance this transaction, it's sustainable, but what are the consequences from of this transaction from a community and a sustainability perspective, not just a bankability perspective? And that was really the beginning of Igugu Global, and recognizing that we needed to build this digital infrastructure that would allow every business to begin to tell its story through a sustainability lens in order to tap into and access equitable financing rate. But this is not yet to dive into what Igugu does, but to share a little bit about this moment of change and this intuition, this feminine intuition that began to wake up in me in 2017 and 2018, as I thought about having lived in South Africa, having lived in Tanzania, having lived in Ghana. There was a very particular type of business and a very particular type of corporate that all banks were serving badly. And I can tell you for free, in the African context, the banks that, the businesses that we do not serve well, businesses that are not supported, are precisely growing businesses. They're businesses that we have a lot of behavioral data about. We know that entrepreneurs are working very hard. We know that a lot of, we know entrepreneurs are working very hard. We know fast growing businesses are typically a combination of cash flush, receiving funding, but not necessarily the type of funding that they need to grow into that next stage of expansion or growth. So having recognized that mid-sized businesses were not well served in the South African context, in the Tanzanian context, in the Ghanaian context, as we asked the question of bankability, as we worked through this debt for nature swap, it became increasingly clear that businesses are not only just about to be asked, are they bankable? What is their credit risk? They're also going to be asked, are they sustainable? And every business needs to be able, at the tip of their tongue, to say, yes, I work in food and beverage. This is our output, and these are the key metrics that drive our climate identity or our climate profile, and this is how we compare versus others in the field. So as I began to think about what that looked like, and this, my intuition sort of expanded around what is it fundamentally that was changing in how people accessed finance. I began to reach out to the likes of the Climate Bonds Initiative, Financial Centers for Sustainability, working with the UN groups, who are really at the beginning of defining what is a green asset, what is a green bond. And we've done immediately tethered to those groups and did a lot of work with them, right? The Climate Bonds Initiative at the time in 2019 had certified 80% of Africa's green bonds. And at the same time, that was exactly when they were starting to see accelerated growth in China and Asia, as well as Latin America. Brazil has really, and Costa Rica have really embraced the climate finance and the green finance opportunity. And the Climate Bonds Initiative was starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed. And it was a great opportunity for us to come in and support them as people that thought, hang on a minute, we've had the Bloomberg experience. We know what it is for African bankers, financial intermediaries, and investors to attempt to search or structure or finance transactions on the continent. Vanilla transactions, never mind transactions that are going to be labeled or earmarked as green transactions or green bonds. And that was when we took a decisive decision that that's what we want to do. We want to be that digital infrastructure that every African business can tap into so that they can tell their sustainability story and say, yes, I'm bankable, yes, I'm sustainable. So in that moment then of searching and building this intuition, we began to build out a framework, or not a framework, a view of what are the drivers of change that were relevant for this moment, this aha moment we had realized as a business for ourselves, as Igugu Global, that finance is changing, how people access finance is changing, and how businesses would have to own their data in order to access finance was changing. We took a step back and said, what are the broader trends, right, that are going to impact all of us? And that's really what I wanted to share with you today, was our map of what drives us and what's driving change, or our framework for what's driving change on a global scale, how businesses tap into that, and then how we begin to leverage technology for sustainability within our businesses, whether they work directly in climate or in finance, or whichever sectors we find ourselves in. So what emerged was this graph, or mind map of drivers, which we decided was, if we're going to change with the future, what are the dimensions of that change? And we settled on 4 of them. That there was definitely something that we knew was happening in technology. There was a new opportunity for us to impact differently. Africa's demography and global demography, also a lot of change happening there. Policy, over the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of change globally and within the continent from a policy perspective. And then the 4th one, which is our purpose that we centered on, building low carbon, climate resilient, and inclusive futures around the sustainability focus on driving change. So I thought maybe to break down each of these, and maybe what you walk away with is reflections on what do each of these drivers of change mean for my business? How are these a tailwind or a headwind that works in my business's favor? And how do I begin to think about leveraging technology to tell my sustainability story, and hopefully choose to accelerate the growth of your business or tap into unique financing instruments that are now available to us, and as we leverage technology to form this new asset class of green and sustainable assets, carbon credits, green bonds, and the like. So maybe to start right at the top on demography, these were all global trends. We adapted them slightly to speak to the African context, and where they don't directly speak to the African context, they have an inverse, or it's the inverse of the labeled gap that does. So from a demography perspective, the Africa's story is one of youth. In Nigeria, where we started our business in a population of 200 million people, the median age is 17.4. That is unique when we look at the rest of the world. Really, when you look at the arch of continents, you can think of Africa as the Gen Z of the world, and then think of perhaps Asia as the more tending towards Gen X of the world in median age. America, the US, the North, into Europe, more the baby boomer of the world in terms of their age profiles. And that has a particular consequence in terms of what sustainable and resilient businesses on the continent look like, and what are the businesses that our company, Ikuku, looks out for when we think about businesses that are going to drive change, businesses that are going to have a direct impact in the communities that we're creating. We look to businesses that understand the youth dynamic and are tapping directly into and leveraging the age and the energy that Africa and our population definitely presents. From an urbanization perspective, urbanization is another is a trend, an ongoing trend, a global trend in the global north. It continues, cities continue to grow. House prices are an issue. Breathable cities, air quality is another emergent issue with urbanization. But for us in Africa, and as a steer for our organization, when we think of urbanization, the stretch of land between Abidjan and Lagos is the fastest urbanizing stretch of land on the planet of the earth, right? The N1 is a trade facilitation road that was partially financed by the UN that runs in various states of quality from Abidjan all the way to Lagos. That is West Africa's major road. Where we are in our development is all of the roads that lead in are basically still very much being built out at a very rapid rate, but still being built out. Trade facilitation road that runs on the coast was one that was financed by the global multilateral development banks and DFI efforts, out of the recognition that without that road, trade onto the continent would be virtually impossible. So when you reflect on the fact that even the road network has not been fully developed, and we now have the fastest urbanizing strip of land on the continent, what that means from a built environment perspective, what that means for energy, what that means for biodiversity, right? When the West African coastline is also home to 20% of the world's mangroves, is real when one reflects on what the continent and particularly that region needs in terms of businesses, infrastructure, as not physical infrastructure, but also social infrastructure. And we certainly look for businesses playing into that trend. It's a trend that's not unique to West Africa. 40% of the continent lives in coastal cities, around Africa. So when we think of coastal cities altogether, and when we think of urbanization, and demography, we think also of the location of that demography, how coastal cities are evolving, and businesses and business models that are building resilience and meeting that moment of rising population, rising urbanization, and the changing demographics. Spoken a little to age profiles, millennials and baby boomers. Baby boomers is listed as a separate block here, simply because it speaks to the global moment we're in, that's accelerated certainly since the start of COVID. Since the start of COVID, or not since the start of COVID, since before, we're seeing certainly from a finance perspective, a once in a lifetime transfer in generational wealth. In annually, through the Capital for Climate and the Impact Capital Network, we're part of a group of finances or fund managers and family offices of 150 families here in the United States that manage $786 billion in wealth. Whether you look at that particular group, whether you look at groups such as the CREO Syndicate, Responsible Investors, and others, within the investment community, there's a lot of anxiety around the wealth transfer that is currently taking place. As wealth is transferred from the baby boomers to the next generation, there is a change in appetites. Younger investors certainly want to see more in terms of understanding the direct impact of their investments, understanding what they mean for from a carbon perspective, from a community perspective. And that wealth transfer and how it's transferring also has consequences for the types of businesses that are going to see funding in this after COVID, as we rebuild and recover from the pandemic. So that's what's happening. Those are the secular drivers of change that we think about from a demography perspective, and how businesses should think about what does this mean for our business, for the people that we serve, for the direction of change and how we tell our growth story. When you move to the left-hand side, part of the reason we're here today is what is the technology piece, and what are the drivers of change in the moment we're in now, and how can technology help us build this and reclaim this intuition, right, of bring back the female leadership and the ways of nurture and stewardship into the work that we do. Global trends, this is getting a bit dated now, but global trends have really been around mobility. In Africa, it's not so much driverless cars, but how do you move more people more efficiently from a transport perspective, be that via rail, via road. Again, many coastal cities are beginning to explore different modes of transportation. Crypto is on this. The fervor for crypto, I'd maybe call it crypto blockchain, is one that comes in waves. We're seeing right now a pullback in the excitement for maybe less developed crypto projects, but the technology is continuing to grow, particularly in periods of pullback such as this, where we have big busts and crypto prices fall. What that really does is it gives the community of people close to that technology community an opportunity to refine the use cases. And I'm sure many of the entrepreneurs on the call today may be leveraging, if not crypto directly, blockchain in their business use cases, which is a technology that has a unique opportunity in Africa, really all over the world. When we find ourselves in blockchain, forums of which we're a part in Lagos, the Lagos blockchain foundation there. But be it in Lagos, be it in South Africa, or be it off the continent, there is without doubt confidence that this is technology that Africa can leverage in terms of how we store our data and then make transactions possible on the back of that, be those financial transactions or different types of transactions in other sectors. Really, when we think of this, often the conversation is on Bitcoin, which is has a very particular use case, and Africa also has a very particular claim to Bitcoin. When you look at Nigeria, which is the second highest volumes of crypto traded in the world, people don't think of Africa in this space, but that's true because Nigerians have found a use case that allows them to. Crypto has been particularly in getting around currency and payments issues in that space. But it's not only the currency and payments applications, but really how we begin to think about contracting, how we think about distributed ledgers in healthcare, in data privacy, and really IDs, a fundamental aspect for why we don't have or see as many transactions as we should on the continent, really boils back down to the identification aspect, how easy or not easy it is to understand a legal entity or an individual business's background. And blockchain is a huge part of the technology suite that our own business is leveraging in terms of changing with the future. How do we personally use that? We've developed Eagle Global. We're a green finance marketplace. So we're a transaction registry of all green bonds that have been issued on the continent. You can see what the use of proceeds for those bonds are, whether it was for energy, whether it was for green building, the price that transaction closed at, and really keeping an immutable record around each of those transactions. We've leveraged that technology because our thesis is that it should not be your bank or financial institution that owns your behavioral profile from a finance perspective, but it's really every single business that should understand their financial behavioral profile, their sustainability behavioral profile, and be able to use that in order to tap into capital across the spectrum, whether they choose to seek commercial capital, grants, or concessional capital. So really, blockchain and its capacity to help us manage data privacy, access, and consensus is something that we've leaned in heavily for the continent, as well as other trends that will continue to drive the direction of change. Smart buildings, we call it smart buildings. You can turn that into a large arc of green and efficient buildings, not just smart buildings. In our work with the IFC, there's a $24 trillion opportunity to make buildings in the global south and emerging markets more efficient, more efficient, either by refurbishments or by simply switching out some of the infrastructure and building materials used in those. And that presents a tremendous opportunity for us as entrepreneurs, wherever we may fall in the value chain, even if we're simply a business that is housed in a building, and what that means for our own climate identity, our own business's carbon footprint, and how we tap into other sources of capital. I want to shift very quickly now to the policy aspect, because this also speaks to this continuous chain of people leadership that we as female entrepreneurs are part of. Here at the bottom, ESG principles, the public financing gap, and rent regulation. Rent regulation is more in the global discourse, it has emerged as people feel the pain acutely of housing supply. In our African context, we can simply call it the housing shortage, and different jurisdictions are developing different approaches to that. But as we change with the future and we contemplate growing populations, the housing aspect and housing policy is one that is beginning to change very rapidly. I think a beautiful example of how some of these dimensions of change begin to interact and manifest into opportunities for us as businesses is if you look in the South African and Kenyan context, for example. It was in South Africa first, and then in Kenya, where regulations and policy has changed in order to allow insurance companies to participate much more directly in the infrastructure investment opportunity. So maybe taking a step back, you'll know insurance companies typically have very set investment mandates. They typically invest in liquid assets, treasury funds, and other liquid financial instruments. But really going back to this notion of, we have on one hand an unlimited supply of, or no shortage of money, trillions of dollars in the wealth transfer moment, looking for a sustainable investment opportunity. A lot of this wealth tends to pool amongst asset managers, amongst large insurers and portfolio managers. Well, those very established industries of insurance and portfolio management, over the last 3 years, we've seen large strides in policy changes that are allowing them now to participate much more directly in the real economy, invest in real assets. And that's something that is a trend that is not just already a reality in South Africa. In Kenya, this work was accelerated by the issuance of Kenya's first green bond, which was for student housing, and the recognition that more businesses can be part of financing and architecting a sustainable future. So this policy point in terms of how policy is seeking this opportunity is a very real one for businesses, and is also an opportunity that invites female leadership, right? I think it ties back directly to the Kigali Communique, which is the output of a group of working female entrepreneurs meeting this moment in terms of what is it, how do we define what sustainability can and should look like by 2030, and taking their role in working with regulators to define that. This is a space that our company, Google Global, has played in and continues to play in a lot. We've worked with regulators in Tanzania, in Ghana, in Nigeria. We have a particular passion for the pains that regulators feel as they rationalize what kind of regulation, regulatory certainty do we need to give in our jurisdiction in order to arrive at a future that is, as some nations have said, net zero, a future that is more resilient and more sustainable. So the policy space and the policy lever is one where we're seeing a significant amount of change, be it change in who finances transactions or how they finance transactions, but also a significant amount of change in the level of partnership and how policy is being driven out through transnational leadership efforts. I shared with you at the start of my presentation a little bit about the work we've done with the Climate Bonds Initiative, but that was really, we're only one player in a working group that set out in Nigeria to define what is going to be a green asset in Nigeria, who is financing green in Nigeria, how do we help businesses on this journey manage their data? But that then became a journey of sharing those lessons, collecting what's been learned in Kenya, collecting from the South African experience, learning from the Moroccan experience as another country that has issued multiple green bonds at this point, in order to arrive at tools that are applicable beyond one jurisdiction, right? So how do we leverage technology to make it easy to consistently identify and benchmark and finance transactions, whether we're talking about an energy business in Nairobi or Soweto or in Tamale, Ghana. And the nature of the result of these sorts of human-to-human partnerships, these working groups like the Kigali, that produce the Kigali Communique, and in the efforts in Lagos, has been a change in policy, has been products or milestones that move us in that direction. When we speak to green bonds, which are debt instruments for climate aligned, or the use of proceeds is guaranteed to be environmentally positive. That piece of work around green bonds in Nigeria has taken us to Kenya and around the continent. But the final output of that in 2020 was the creation of the Africa Green Bond Toolkit that was launched with FSD Africa. So we're very energized and excited that these efforts that we are making at sharing and way making and deciding and defining what is green, what is material for African businesses, and how do we disclose and come to market, is crystallizing into a common language, which will create acceleration in that single funnel of deal flow that is now easier able to search, structure, and finance the ideal opportunity. The final trend, the land squarely in our playing field, or the final dimension, is that of sustainability. Right, I've already spoken to resource efficiency, the questions of cities of tomorrow. What do Africa's cities of tomorrow look like? We already know a considerable number of them are on the coastline. They face rising sea levels, accelerated urbanization, young populations. So even in working with businesses, being able to map and tell that story of the infrastructure we're putting in place today to serve the cities of tomorrow is something that we definitely think about as we work with each business and think about what is this business's climate boundaries and climate impact today, and what does the climate impact and climate boundary look like tomorrow as they continue to realize their aspiration of low carbon, inclusive, and climate resilient communities. The rise of renewables, we've spoken a little to that. I think it also ties back directly to the Kigali Communique, in that, even, or maybe just to not spend too much time on that, the rise of renewables calls on us in so many different ways, or calls on so many of us that do not work directly in the renewable space, be it in finance, directly in the space that we work with, but also in businesses in the energy, in the energy value chain. So together with the transition agenda, impact investing, which directly ties back to this once in a generation wealth transfer in demography and the baby boomers. Impact investing is a driver of change that is a direct result of the wealth transfer and young people wanting to understand at a lot greater detail what is the impact, or what is it really that their money is being put to work in? Is it something that they can go to bed feeling good about? And really, our part in that has been helping businesses come to grips with the data that needs to be submitted, along with the profit and loss in order to assure investors that, yes, indeed, these businesses are working towards a transparent and benchmarked climate or environmental impact in the communities that they are in. I feel like I've already taken up a lion's share of our time together, just going through all of these in terms of how do we think about the world right now? What are long-term levers that are going to continue to be with all of our businesses? And then how can we use them to tell our own businesses' growth story and begin to map some of the data metrics that will really empower us to tell the story of our businesses in a way that is compelling to our stakeholders. Of course, our communities that we work in are very familiar with the work that we do, but particularly stakeholders up the finance chain that are able to help us grow our businesses as they ladder from one step of maturity to the next. I'm not sure, I had prepped a few more slides, but I'll quickly whiz through these and then open up to Q&A, which I believe would be a lot more valuable. So with the dimensions of secular change in mind, really, if I were to speak to why we exist, what it is that we do as Igugu Global, we say we're accelerating Africa's flow of green finance. I shared with you a little part of how our business started a day in 2017 when we began to work on what would be the world's first debt for nature swap. But really this concept of green finance is one that's been around for almost 15 years now. But it's incredible how much has changed and how much acceleration has happened in just the last 5 years. The first green bond was issued by the World Bank in 2008. And it was fairly okay ticking right up until even in 2017, 2018, when we issued the world's first blue bond, which was to protect the ocean. Cumulative green bond issuances had been ticking along, growing every year, but had not yet reached a significant, so over $200 billion in issuance per annum. But we saw a real acceleration of this in 2018 and 2019, and in 2020, the world reached the milestone of $1 trillion in green bonds issued. The coronavirus pandemic was particularly important in terms of really getting the world to reflect on fragility, reflect on stewardship, reflect on the climate crisis. And the response to that was absolutely massive acceleration and people really seeking out sustainable investment opportunities. And what we instantly began to see is the results of the slide is that because in jurisdictions where there wasn't this foundational challenge of how do businesses prove bankability, in geographies where there was already a certain degree of infrastructure in order to help businesses track their environmental and social risks, it was a lot easier for those geographies to immediately tap into the data points that were required to begin speaking the language of opportunity and really accelerate the market. So we went from $1 trillion in green bonds, that milestone was hit in December of 2020. We're now at the other side of $3 trillion in green bonds issued in just 2 years. So an incredible amount of acceleration, and that acceleration has mostly been in the global north, North America, Asia Pacific, and Europe. And Africa's participation of that has continued to be less than 1% of global green and climate finance proceeds. For us as an organization, it's obvious we cannot move in a world where we speak of Africa being the most climate vulnerable, where we go to conferences and the COPs where they describe the African child deprived of education, or the African women, or women who contribute $1.7 trillion in invisible labor to the global economy. But we then don't speak about how do we get capital to those people who are vulnerable in order to build a more resilient world. So for us, accelerating the flow of green finance so that the capital that desires to make an impact is able to find that opportunity, be it in Lesotho, be it in the Seychelles, or be it in the Volta region of Accra. That is the reason why we exist, to be that digital infrastructure, to be that turnkey solution that helps any business begin to answer the question of, in my sector, what are the sustainability risks? Am I exposed to any of them? And what is the minimum amount of data that I should be able to have at my fingertips when I begin to speak of our business as one that is creating a just and equitable future? So once the balance on this 1% total Africa participation begins to shift, we will know that we're truly living in our purpose, right? Where we don't just speak of Africa being climate vulnerable, but we'll know that the infrastructure for African businesses that work within communities is there for them to prove that they're both bankable and sustainable. Cumulatively across the continent, there's a $1.5 trillion gap in just sustainable infrastructure, and that's been mapped across sectors. The sustainability opportunity is really one that's open to all, and I'd really invite anyone that wants to learn more about what is happening in their sectors, how they tap into that, be it through an innovation lens or through a more direct real assets perspective. I really do leave that opportunity and invite you to reach out and welcome that. But in essence, it's again addressing the fragmentation. Our business is a technology platform where we have the Green Finance Registry, but we're values-led organization, and we really believe in this human bridge that allows us not only to have legal entities that are on top of their data, but the relationships as well that connect them with the financing that they're seeking. So it's a Green Finance Registry of transactions, who are the investors, and it's also a registry of finances looking for green and climate-aligned financing opportunities across the continent by sector. I think running out of time, I'd just like to land it there and say, really what our business does is we leverage climate and sustainability data to better originate, benchmark, and showcase sustainable assets to investors. And what we're really doing is improving transparency between climate finances and companies and the communities they live in, providing the digital infrastructure for the climate transition, and accelerating the flow of capital to natural and sustainable infrastructure. This is our part, and I think this is a good place to, I'm not sure if I prepared any other presentations. There were a few more slides, but we're eGoogle Global, and we help clients find treasure. From the moment we started our company, the first questions we had posed at us when we launched in Nigeria in 2019, on the back of the issuance of the first green bond, first commercial green bond in Nigeria, was an overwhelming number of businesses saying, how can I access green finance and investment? Because they'd suddenly learned that, hey, if I'm able to arrange my data in a particular way, I'm able to showcase my sustainability against the rest of my sector peers, and attract a better rate of long-term sustainable funding. That was a proposition that entrepreneurs and businesses understood immediately. So that side of the marketplace, the response was overwhelming. But right at that moment, we also had financiers and investors asking us a lot of questions in terms of how do we assess green project eligibility? We're looking for green deals, but we don't know what green looks like in Africa. And we set out to help them answer that question in the platform that we built. At a glance, we operate across 9 countries. We have more than 3,000 companies now that have built their own climate identity wallets and started the journey to understanding what are the sustainability issues that they are exposed to and what is the opportunity for them to leverage the sector that they're in, the work that they do, in order to help us build a more just transition and a more sustainable future. There you go. I think I will leave it at that for that. So that's a little bit about what we do. I think just to close, the work that we do, I hope you will recognize now, builds on this same idea of what is the intuition and the intelligence that's missing in the world. Yes, there's a lot of technology that we have an opportunity to leverage, but there's an innate and unique leadership that's called upon us as women, as entrepreneurs, as African entrepreneurs, in designing a robust and sustainable and resilient future. And we invite all women, all leaders, all businesses, regardless of their sector they're in, to begin to discover what their sustainability exposures look like, but more importantly, what the opportunity is for them to accelerate their transition and really take a leadership role in growing their businesses in resilient ways and attract additional finance in order to do so.
Thank you so much, Anele. What an interesting conversation that we're having. I think that sustainability is becoming more than a buzzword on the continent. I think that people are taking it a lot more seriously. And I think that this is really a great forum where women are given the opportunity to at least start to ignite those types of strategies within their or existing business plan. So thank you for that. We do have a few questions if you can. If you just have about 5 minutes to maybe just answer a few that have come through the chat, and then we'll be more than happy to close off the chat. So the first question that I can see here is from Raveen. She says, hello, Anele, your expertise in sustainable finance is commendable. Could you share your insights on how technology is transforming funding opportunities in Africa?
Oh, in so many ways, I mean, and I recall in 2019, when I first decided I'm leaving banking, I'm gonna be an entrepreneur. And I had latched onto this idea of, oh my goodness, there's this thing called a green bond. Only 5 of them have been issued in Africa, or whatever the case was. Why can't we make more happen to attract more capital to the continent? Because there's so many businesses that are for good, whether people are building green buildings or they have carpool businesses. I saw some of the women in the room today. So many are involved in sustainable efforts. Mm-hmm. And we set out to discover what are the blockages and barriers, and we did this at a large scale. I told you that we reached out to the Climate Bonds Initiative, who had certified all of the green bonds issued to date at that time. We flew to New York as well, right? I moved to New York for a period of a year, and as I said to you, genuinely, there is no shortage of money. We just have to figure out why it's not in Africa with us. Mm-hmm. And so I moved to New York to ask these questions and took meetings with the likes of the New York Pension Fund. And they were happy to take the meeting. And they said, no, of course we have appetite for Africa. You know, we'd love to invest in Africa. We have a $3 billion allocation for Africa. And then you ask how much of that, at the time, asked how much of that had been invested. $0 had been invested. $0. Why had $0 been invested? Because it was at the time $180 billion pension fund managed by 7 gentlemen. Managing $180 billion, you have a $3 billion allocation for Africa. Firstly, $3 billion is a small amount of $180 billion. And you look at the $3 billion and you look at the pension fund mandates that they face, and they're looking for businesses, they're ready to invest, but whatever they invest in, they can't be more than 20% of the total capital allocation of that investment. So you think in real terms, so who are these people looking for? If you're looking to invest, but you can't be more than a 20% allocation and you've got $3 billion, they were immediately looking for, and the smallest check they could cut was $100 million. So if the smallest check you can cut is $100 million and you can't be more than 20% of the capital stack, it means you're looking for billion-dollar businesses.
That's correct.
Right? So, and how many of those are there in Africa working directly on women's issues in a rural village in Chad? So one of the ways that technology has rapidly changed the game and how the way we as an organization work with funders has changed is obviously that right there is an invitation to an aggregation conversation. I can't find you a $1 billion organization in Africa, but that does social housing, but I can definitely tell you about 7 transactions or 10 transactions that are seeking $10 million each, right? And you can be some representative portion of those. So the first thing that technology has given us is the opportunity to aggregate the opportunity as we present it to investors on a global scale. That is something that was previously not available, right? And if you think of even blockchain and the dimensions of secular change, what does blockchain and crypto enable us to do? It enables us as entrepreneurs to hold and house our information and to selectively share that information. So I don't have to be in due diligence with everybody that sees my investment deck through an email. I can have a turnkey deal room that I email to you, and I can safely trust that through the secure access link, you now have access to everything you need to know about my transaction. So technology is changing the way we share data, how much data organizations have. It's changing the way we finance, how we aggregate the finance opportunity. Because even if you look in the private equity or the venture capital space in Africa, there's been a tremendous amount of change over the last 5 years. I think between 2020 and 2022, we saw almost a doubling in the size of the market every year over the last 2 years. I think the 23 and 22 have been quiet, but if you look at the trends, 2018 to 2019, it's chalk and cheese, the deal flow coming to Africa. Mm-hmm. And that's precisely because there are more players, there are more people using technology to present their data and showcase their information. There's more people aggregating the opportunity. So in terms of how we build a continuous funnel to this, a continuous funnel to the trillions, mm-hmm. Technology has done a lot in terms of laying down the digital infrastructure that allows African businesses to choose who they share their information with, who finances them, and how they map their growth journey, right? So we no longer have businesses that are bent on the journey of applying to local grants, then trying to persuade local commercial banks, and then hoping the transaction may be attractive for a syndication. Entrepreneurs and businesses can today choose where on the spectrum of capital do I want to tap into. Am I looking for concessional capital because we deal a lot with the community and in biodiversity? If I am looking for concessional capital, what other forms of capital stack well to finance my project? So there's a lot I can say for how technology has changed the finance opportunity on the basis of how technology is allowing us to change how we tell our stories, and how technology is allowing us to connect with different investors and people with different priorities.
Absolutely. And I think that the next question, you have actually touched on aspects that actually answer this. But we have a question from our country director in Nigeria. He said, great presentation, Adele, most insightful. He says, iGoogle Global is doing some fantastic work. Are there any transactional deal size limitations for businesses that are seeking financing through your organization? And also, is there a minimum or maximum funding amounts that iGoogle looks for? And also, are there any initiatives that women-owned businesses can get involved with to get finance in the sustainable space? You mentioned the issues of differentials when it comes to cost of fundings. In light of recent requests from African leaders for more competitive interest rates, how is iGoogle addressing this issue?
Okay, I heard that one in 3 portions. There's one about eligibility requirements for the iGoogle platform.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one about sort of cost initiatives for female-owned businesses to get involved in.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. And then the final one is on cost of funding to Africa.
Well, competitive interest rates in that type of sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I just made a note of that. Okay, in terms of our platform and the work that we do, our aspiration is for every single legal entity on the continent to be able to sign up, understand what sector they're in, and the sustainability risks that they are exposed to. We fundamentally believe that every African business should have access to this, and we have that capability. When we say 3,000 businesses have signed up onto our platform, that's what you're able to do. We make it possible to compare sectors on a like-for-like basis, and we endeavor to work with all businesses to give them that first empowering statement of, I understand my sustainable risk exposures and can have some kind of competent conversation with that. In terms of how the rest of our platform is built out and the maturity of what happens then once you understand your sustainable risk exposures, our climate identity wallets at this stage are used by corporates and project developers that are financing projects. The typical project size, project financing requirement is between 15 to 45 million. This is not a limit. It doesn't mean that don't find out your sustainable risk exposure until you're a multi-billion-dollar business. This is fundamentally part of what we're trying to remedy, right? Because if you look at Europe, you saw that slide I said around the slide I presented around the graphs of how much, what proportion of green finance exists in different jurisdictions. Fundamentally, part of the reason why African businesses lack access to capital is because they've not tagged themselves as green. So that first step of, I am Anele of iGoogle Global and we operate in this sector doing that, every business is able to do that, and we make that available. In terms of walking the journey to market, because our expertise is particularly developed around green bonds and carbon assets, the transactions we've dealt with to date are bigger. But that then is a gateway of a process that is designed for transactions of any size, because what we have on our platform on the financing side is a registry of financiers, more than 300 financiers that are seeking eligible financing opportunities that are climate aligned. And in terms of organizing those businesses seeking investment opportunities, we've taken the whole gambit, right? We have grant allocators. There's an incredible, a growing number of foundations that want to play in this space, but we also have access to commercial and private capital as well through banks, private equities and venture capitals. So that's on eligibility. On the point of initiatives, I cannot speak to gender-specific initiatives. I really will call on Awit on that, but I've already boldly called on all of you and all leaders of female leadership to take the role in the climate conversation, the climate finance, climate transition conversation. And there are several initiatives I'd love to share with you. I spoke a little bit around the Kigali communique. If anything I said there resonated to you, I really encourage you to reach out. We would love to map your business. We would love to put you directly in touch with Sustainable Energy for All. I especially call on everyone in Kenya. SE for All is so strong in Kenya. Really, the legacy of Wangari Maathai is strong there. And there's ongoing work that we'd love to plug you in that regard. You'll forgive me, I didn't spend very much time going into what are green bonds, what's happening in green finance or carbon, but in Africa, there is the Africa Carbon Markets Initiative that has recently been launched for businesses, and all businesses should at least have a conversation around what carbon in Africa, what carbon credits could mean for you and your business. We would love to connect any businesses on the call with the ongoing work to connect businesses in the carbon value chain, whether it's clean stove cooking or any of the initiatives that support the carbon value chain. We would love to be in touch with those businesses and to map them and connect them to those initiatives. We continue to play a lot in green bonds, bringing transactions to market. If this is an area your business is wanting to tap into, we're happy to work with you directly or plug you into a larger group, global group. Really, if you think there's a project that you may have that would be eligible for green finance, I can't invite you enough to reach out, because this is an ongoing movement amongst financiers of various sorts that are looking for these opportunities. Whether you look at FSD Africa, which is the largest funder in the world for financial sector development in Africa, who are focused on green, we work very closely with them, or other financiers in our registry. There are initiatives particularly focused on those who are developing a green project that is community-led or within the community focused, seeking additional financing. The third point around cost of funding, I love it. We've called the last COP, they said, was the finance COP. If the last COP wasn't the finance COP, this one's the finance COP for sure. It's what was on everyone's lips at the Bonn meetings. Everyone saw the fancy Paris meetings Macron also had. They've all been centered on financing. This is because the Global North made $100 billion a year financing commitment to capital, to climate in Africa, and this has by and large not been met. We're 10 years down on this $100 billion a year annual contribution. And at best, in the best year before the pandemic, we got almost $80 billion in climate tagged finance flows to Africa. When you look at a breakdown of the funding that Africa has received from a climate perspective, a lot of it has just been traditional finance. It's been debt. It hasn't been grants. It hasn't been concessional. It hasn't been financing that's really supposed to support communities as they transition. And that's why you've seen global leaders like Mia Mottley in the Barbados lead this all of the global South in terms of us not needing, but really requiring more competitive financing rates in order to drive adaptation and mitigation, but particularly adaptation projects on the continent. As a banker, if you ask me, cost of funding always boils back, and not just a banker, as a treasurer, so the banker's banker. Cost of funding always draws back to data, right? And what the behavioral profile I have on you. So the political call for a better rate of funding is really underpinned by a lot of work that is being done in these initiatives. So I spoke to you about financial centers for sustainability, but particularly in banking, in the mechanisms of finance, there's the Network for Greening Financial Services. We were lucky enough to be the only African company selected by the Bank for International Settlements, which is the central bank of the world's central banks, as they were figuring out what is climate risk, what does it mean for regulators, do we put in place laws? If we put in place laws, what do they measure? Do they lead to resilience? I shared with you my passion for all things regulatory. So we worked with this group over a 3-month period. And fundamentally, if we're going to solve the cost of funding issue, it's got to be about what kind of data do we make it really easy for people to show us? And what does that tell us about their risk exposure? So while there's the political message of we need better funding rates, there's the on-the-ground reality of how do we get better funding rates, and that's by having infrastructure that enables us to draw better behavioral profiles on the sustainability of businesses on the African continent. And for us, that's more companies with climate identity wallets, more robust data on how those companies have performed, and strengthening the relationships that those companies are able to build with long-term financiers as they mature as businesses.
100%. Thank you so much, Anele. We have had a few questions in the chat as well, requesting if you would like to share the presentation with the attendees. I'll be more than happy to create that connection, and of course your contacts with them so that they can get in touch with you in terms of what it is that they need to do if they would like to start building up their sustainability profile. So thank you so much, Anele. It has been such an insightful conversation. Like I said in the beginning, sustainability is no longer a buzzword. It's something that we really need to start consciously taking awareness of, not only just because of financing, but I will say that because WeConnect International works with large corporations, we are seeing a shift in how some of these corporations are actually buying from some of their suppliers, and ESG and that type of consideration is being taken into consideration when they are sourcing from you. So this is something that I would definitely say that revisit, definitely do your research on it, reach out to Anele and other experts in the field who will be able to help you to align your business strategy with some of these great sustainability talks that we've had. So thank you once again, Anele. Very insightful conversation. I think that our women-owned businesses are going to be walking away thinking about their businesses differently, how they approach the world, and of course, the future of who their clients are in the long term. So thank you so much for that, Anele.
Thank you very much. I've shared my email in the chat should anyone want to connect on the back of this, and really look forward to that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So for those of you, please take note of Anele's email address. I'm also happy to share it with you after the call. I also like to thank African Women in Technology for partnering with WeConnect International to bring us all together. And of course, we want to make sure that our women-owned businesses are still connecting with one another. Like we said before, well, I'll say that Rowena said before, this is really a great forum where women-owned businesses from all around the continent are being connected through technology, and we want to continue that momentum going forward. So thank you, everybody. I wish you a good afternoon, and Anele, to you, good morning. Thank you for joining us so early, and we wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you, everyone.
Thank you.